Hi, this is Hatim Kheir, counsel for the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, with the update for Day 20 of the Public Order Emergency Commission hearings. Today we heard from three witnesses. We heard from Jim Willett, the Mayor of Coutts, Alberta. We heard from Mario Di Tommaso, the Deputy Solicitor General for Ontario, and Ian Freeman, an Assistant Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario. One thing to note today is the evidence of Deputy Solicitor General Di Tommaso was unfortunately interrupted when Commission Counsel Gabriel Poliquin fainted mid-examination. From what I understand, he awoke shortly afterwards. He was taken away by paramedics, and from what I understand, he is doing better, but best wishes to him, and I hope he recovers soon. A couple highlights from the other witnesses we heard from. From Mayor Willett, he did describe the impact that the protests had on the residents of Coutts, Alberta. The way he put it, he didn't think that the protesters had any grievance with the village of Coutts. Their grievance was with the provincial and federal governments, but they did have an impact on his residents. And he actually became quite emotional, describing some of his residents feeling trapped and being unable to get past the blockade. That said, he did say some of his other residents, like some of the farmers that live in Coutts, felt quite comfortable going past the large equipment that was at the protest, even if they had to drive through a field for part of it. Some highlights from his evidence are that he did say the protest was, in his view, cleared because of the guns that were found at Coutts, Alberta. So those were found on the morning of February 14th. The declaration of emergency happened later in the day on February 14th, and then shortly after that, the protest was cleared. Though in his view, he didn't think that happened because of the emergency declaration. The way he put it is that he thought the clearing of the protest was largely due to police action and not due to federal action. He also described how a field of Crown land was obtained in order to allow protesters to continue protesting next to the highway. Initially, there was very little interest in doing that, though after the protest cleared, there was a group of protesters that then continued their protest on that patch of land for weeks later. After Deputy Solicitor General Di Tommaso's evidence was interrupted, there was the commission was interrupted for a bit, and then it continued in the afternoon with the evidence of Ian Freeman. So he's in the Ministry of Transportation, and a few highlights that came out of his evidence. He talked about the province's CVOR regime, and so that's the commercial vehicle registrations. So eventually, when the province declared its emergency, one of the powers it implemented was a power to revoke the registrations of commercial vehicles. So he described that before that provincial power was implemented, there was discussions about using CVORs to deter protesters. However, there was a concern that using it in that manner would delegitimize it because it's actually intended to address unsafe driving on the highway, not to maintain public order in relation to demonstrations. So eventually that same function was done under the provincial powers, which he said also enabled them to avoid the processes that are under the normal system. He also talked about the Ministry of Transportation's role in obtaining tow trucks. He says ultimately the ministry was able to facilitate obtaining 10 tow trucks, which were provided to Ottawa. So these weren't tow trucks that the ministry owned, but rather private towing companies that were sent to Ottawa and connected by the Ministry of Transportation. He said that the emergency powers weren't necessary, though he did say that the indemnification provisions were helpful in that some of the tow truck drivers were asking for that, though he wasn't sure what was actually, whether that was, that's what turned them to actually agreeing to provide their services, in his view. Something that was really interesting that came out of the cross-examination by Sujit Chowdhury, who's counsel for the Canadian Constitution Foundation. He put a provision from the Highway Traffic Act to Mr. Freeman, which allows the lieutenant governor to make regulations prohibiting tow truck drivers from doing any kind of prescribed act, and then if they do that, it's an offense. So the way Mr. Chowdhury put it to Mr. Freeman was that the lieutenant governor could have effectively just prohibited refusing to provide towing services when requested by specific public officials, and that would have achieved the same result as done under the Federal Emergencies Act. So as you'll remember, we've heard from previous witnesses that it keeps coming back to four main powers that were used by the Emergencies Act. There was the provision of tow trucks, there was creating an exclusion zone, there was the financial measures that were used, and then there was the swearing in of officers. We've heard things about all of them up to now. Yesterday we talked about the exclusion zone. So coming back to the tow truck issue, this is an interesting angle from Mr. Chowdhury, where basically this very broadly worded provision under the Highway Traffic Act would allow the exact same powers that were then used under the Emergency Act with respect to tow trucks. So that's the summary for today, and tune in tomorrow for the next update. Thanks, and I'll talk to you then.